Secondly, you, more than almost anyone else I can remember in the Democratic primaries, used to talk about increasing the size of the court. In fact, I remember us discussing 15 justices. Is that what you hope President Biden would do?
My views haven't changed. I think bipartisan reform with the purpose of reducing the politicization of the court is a really promising idea. Let's also be clear that a president can't just snap their fingers and do it. And most of all, we don't want to allow this president to change the subject, which is what they're always doing. There are all kinds of interesting questions about the future of the American judiciary. But right now, as we speak, the pre-existing condition coverage of millions of Americans might depend on what is about to happen in the Senate with regard to this justice. My marriage might depend on what is about to happen in the Senate with regard to this justice. So many issues are on the line. And, this current president and his supporters, they have a remarkable gift for changing the subject. We're not going to let them because we know that the American people are with us on this issue. And we can't let them just paper over or throw up smoke around the fact that if you love
is it changing the subject? I mean,
condition, or if you are someone
isn't that
with a pre-existing condition, your health
Mayor,
care is on the line.
if you're talking about the Supreme Court, isn't the question of packing the court, which a lot of Democrats, including you, had talked about doing, and Vice President Biden refusing to answer that, that's not changing the subject. I mean, don't voters have a right to know before they vote, and it's already too late for millions of them, where Joe Biden stands on that issue?
Well, he's spoken about this many times. He's talked about the fact that he's not a fan of what's called packing. Of course, we also got to talk about what kinds of reforms we're interested in. A long, complex discussion that is clearly not what's on the minds of the people who are trying to use it as a distraction. They just want to talk about literally anything besides health care, which the president is trying to take away and the court might take away, and the pandemic, which is costing so many lives and so many livelihoods in this country.
At some point, conservatives are going to have to realize that trying to make court packing an issue they're going to be able to run on in this election is simply not going to happen. And the reason is simple. The question isn't being asked in good faith, it's being asked so that Republicans can run ads on an endless loop about the dangers of packing the courts and the destruction of our country's institutions and norms. And yes, they're doing it without a shred of irony given what Trump and Republicans have done to this country over the last 4 years. Now, as Pete mentioned, Republicans will try and frame this as Biden ducking the question, but he's been crystal clear in why he's refusing to answer it.
How about that question of expanding the court? Here's what you said exactly 1 year ago tonight at a Democratic debate. You said, I would not get into court packing. I would not pack the court. That's not what you're saying now. Is the nomination of Judge Barrett reason enough to rethink your position?
What is the nomination? What I wanted to do, George, if I had answered the question directly, then all the focus would be on what's Biden going to do if he wins, instead of on, is it appropriate what is going on now? And it should stay, this is the thing that the president loves to do, always take our eye off the ball. What's at stake?
And he's right. It's a gotcha question. It's an attack. If the question was being asked in good faith, that would be one thing, but it's not. And everyone knows it's not. The simple fact is that if the Trump administration really cared about defending our government's institutions and norms, they wouldn't break campaign finance laws or violate the Hatch Act on an almost daily basis. They wouldn't have stood idly by while Trump extorted a foreign country for dirt and Joe Biden and orchestrated a large-scale cover-up. They wouldn't have accepted nor continued to accept foreign help from the Russians, whose sole priority is spreading disinformation for the express purpose of helping Trump get reelected. Let's not pretend for a second that Trump cares about norms as opposed to simply retaining his grip on power. In reality, the issue at hand here is not the sacrosanctity of the number 9 in terms of justices on the Supreme Court, it's what a 6-3 conservative court actually represents. And what it represents is the end of the Affordable Care Act, which 20 million Americans rely on for health coverage and is the only law we have protecting coverage for pre-existing conditions. It represents the end of Roe v. Wade and a woman's right to choose what she does with her own body. It represents the end of badly needed voting rights reform, instead allowing Republicans to entrench their own minority rule so that they can install more conservative justices in an anti-democratic vicious cycle. It represents the end of climate change legislation, especially considering Amy Coney Barrett herself couldn't even bring herself to say that climate change was real.
And do you accept that COVID-19 is infectious?
I think, yes, I do accept that COVID-19 is infectious. That's something of which I feel like, we could say you take judicial notice of. It's an obvious fact, yes.
Do you accept that smoking causes cancer?
I'm not sure exactly where you're going with this, but the notice that smoking
it's
causes.
The question is what it is. You can answer it if you believe. Yes or no?
Senator Harris, yes, every package of cigarettes warns that smoking causes cancer.
And do you believe that climate change is happening and is threatening the air we breathe and the water we drink?
Senator, again, I was wondering where you were going with that. You have asked me a series of questions that are completely uncontroversial, like whether COVID-19 is infectious, whether smoking causes cancer, and then trying to analogize that to eliciting an opinion on me that is a very contentious matter, opinion from me that is on a very contentious matter of public debate. And I will not do that. I will not express a view on a matter of public policy, especially one that is politically controversial, because that's inconsistent with the judicial role, as I have explained.
Thank you, Judge Barrett. And you've made your point clear that you believe it's a debatable point.
The fact is that the GOP is trying to reframe the conversation because those are issues that the American people stand with Democrats on. Protecting Roe has the support of 3/4 of all Americans. Protecting the ACA is an issue that Democrats ran on in 2018 and won the House by the biggest margin in American history. And nearly 2/3 of Americans believe the government should be doing more about climate change. Republicans want to talk about court packing because it takes the focus off the fact that they have barely any support from the American people when it comes to what a 6-3 court would represent. But more broadly, Supreme Court aside, the only reason that Republicans want to even have this conversation is because they need something, anything, to take the attention away from this president's disastrous handling of this country. We have 220,000 dead Americans, 8% unemployment, 11 million Americans out of work. And because Trump refused to take any steps to contain this pandemic, cases are about to hit their highest point ever. The outbreak started 8 months ago, and not only are we not out of the woods, but we're trending in the absolute wrong direction. All because since day one, Trump has been more concerned with downplaying the virus than he has with getting it under control. So if you're wondering why the White House is so hell-bent on talking about court packing, it's because their mismanagement in office has led to the deaths of nearly 250,000 Americans, and it's only getting worse. So don't pay attention to the Trump campaign's deflections, because there is a reason they want your attention trained away from the issues that matter. And that is because this administration doesn't represent the will of the American people, they represent themselves and themselves only. If you like this video, please check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I take a deep dive into the week's most important stories and interview major players in politics, including Kamala Harris, Katie Porter, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Eric Swalwell, Mary Trump, Al Franken, Cory Booker, and many, many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.